I am Claire, 33 years old, and 30 minutes before the anesthesia was supposed to knock me out for my breast cancer surgery. My phone buzzed. I expected a sweet message from my husband, Jason. Instead, the screen read, "I want a divorce papers are with my lawyer. I am not built for a sick wife." I did not cry. I just turned to the rugged guy in the hospital bed next to me, who had just slid a paper napkin across the tray table for my tears, and said, "If I survive this, marry me. Let us see if my ex loses his mind." The stranger looked me dead in the eye and said, "Okay, it is a deal." I had no idea that a simple joke with a guy named Alex Smith was about to trigger a chain of events that would strip my husband of his career, his mistress, and his freedom. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build your own justice when the people who swore to protect you walked away. The rhythmic beeping of the hospital monitors echoed in the pre-op ward. I was prepped for a stage 1 lumpectomy, a terrifying reality for anyone, but I had faced it with my usual pragmatic approach. I am the supply chain director for a national retail corporation. My entire career is built on anticipating disruptions, managing logistics, and optimizing assets. For the past 7 years, I applied that exact same mindset to my marriage. Jason is 35 years old and a vice president at a mid-sized tech firm in Chicago. But he did not start out that way. When we met, he was drowning in student loans. I worked 70-hour weeks to pay off his massive MBA debt. I managed our mortgage, curated his networking dinners, and handled every domestic logistical nightmare so he could climb the corporate ladder undisturbed. I essentially carried him to the executive suite on my back. But the moment the oncologist looked at my scan and said the word cancer, I saw the shift in Jason's eyes. I was no longer a reliable stepping stone. I had become a defective asset. That cold, sterile text message was the final proof. As I stared at the glowing screen, the sheer cruelty of his timing washed over me. He knew I was alone. His mother, Patricia, had conveniently booked a spa weekend with his entitled younger sister, Natalie, claiming they could not handle the stress of hospital waiting rooms. Jason himself had cited a critical quarterly meeting he absolutely could not miss. I was entirely alone in my most vulnerable moment. But I did not burst into hysterical tears. My supply chain brain kicked into high gear. I viewed my marriage as a partnership built on mutual investment, but I was wrong. Jason was an opportunist. He liked the prestige of a successful wife, but the moment that wife required maintenance, his cost-benefit analysis dictated a swift exit. I lay there under the thin hospital blanket, calculating the immediate financial damage, mentally auditing our shared accounts, and strategizing how to uncouple from a parasite while recovering from cancer. It was in that moment of absolute calculating silence that a crumpled paper napkin landed perfectly on my cheek. I turned my head, startled. Across the small gap between our hospital bays lay a man recovering from an emergency appendectomy. According to the whiteboard above his bed, his name was Alex Smith. He looked to be about 38 years old, with dark hair and a sharp, analytical gaze that seemed entirely out of place in a dreary hospital room. He watched me with an intensity that made me briefly forget the burning in my chest. He had the quiet confidence of a man used to holding all the cards, even while wearing a faded hospital gown. He did not look at me with pity. He just observed me. "That is a brutal way to get dumped," he said, his voice deep and calm, lacking the typical awkward sympathy people offer cancer patients. I read it aloud. "Did I?" I asked, my voice dry. "You mumbled the sick wife part," he replied. "The rest I gathered from the murderous look in your eyes." I stared at him, fueled by the pre-anesthesia medication pumping through my IV and a sudden overwhelming wave of spite. He looked just as battered as I felt, pale from surgery, hooked up to monitors, wearing a terrible hospital gown. "You look like hell too," I told him. "If I survive this surgery, marry me. Let us see if my ex loses his mind." It was a joke, a bitter coping mechanism thrown out into the sterile air to keep myself from screaming. But Alex Smith did not laugh. He did not brush it off. He looked me dead in the eye, his expression completely serious. "Okay," he said smoothly. "It is a deal." Before I could formulate a response to his bizarre acceptance, the anesthesiologist arrived to wheel me away. I closed my eyes as the medication pulled me under, letting out a dark, cynical laugh at the absolute absurdity of my life. When I finally woke up, the world was hazy and heavy with pain. My chest ached with a dull, burning pressure. I reached for my phone, my fingers clumsy and slow. The screen lit up with a barrage of banking alerts. Jason had not just sent a text, he had executed a strike. He had drained our joint savings account, transferred the funds to a private account, and taken my SUV from the hospital parking lot. Every dollar I had, meticulously saved for our future for potential investments, was gone. The betrayal was complete and absolute, executed with the precision of a coward who wanted to ensure I had no resources to fight back. He had left me stranded, recovering from surgery, with a stack of unpaid medical bills that were entirely under my name. I took a shallow breath, refusing to let the panic win. I would audit this. I would track every stolen penny. As I lay there, gathering my strength, a sudden flurry of activity in the adjacent bay caught my attention. A senior hospital administrator dressed in a sharp suit rushed in looking panicked. He practically bowed as he approached the bed where my fake fiancé Alex was resting. "Is everything to your satisfaction, sir? We can have you moved to the executive wing immediately," the administrator asked, his voice trembling with deference. Alex waved him off with a casual flick of his wrist. "I am fine right here. Keep it quiet." As the administrator hurried away, a young nurse standing near the curtain dividing our bays froze. She turned to her colleague, her eyes wide with shock, and whispered furiously, "Do you have any idea who that man actually is?" I closed my eyes, the heavy painkillers pulling me back into a deep sleep, entirely unaware that the man who had just agreed to my spiteful marriage proposal was Alexander Pierce, a self-made billionaire, and the founder of the venture capital firm that was currently preparing a hostile takeover of my ex-husband's technology company. 2 days later, the hospital discharged me. The physical pain in my chest was sharp, a constant reminder of the lumpectomy, but it paled in comparison to the financial hemorrhage Jason had inflicted. I did not return to our marital home. I knew Jason would have already changed the locks, or worse, moved his new life in before the sheets were even cold. Instead, I directed my cab to a cheap short-term rental on the outskirts of the city. It was a bleak, cramped studio apartment with flickering fluorescent lights and a mattress that felt completely solid. But it was a secure operational base, and right now I needed a command center, not a sanctuary. I opened my laptop and connected to the spotty internet. My supply chain background had trained me to view chaos as a series of data points waiting to be organized. I logged into every financial portal I could still access. Jason had been thorough, but nobody is perfect. He had drained our primary joint savings, taking exactly $82,000. He had canceled my access to the shared credit cards. He even managed to route the autopay for my upcoming medical bills far away. He directed them to a defunct checking account, ensuring my default. I felt a cold, calculated anger settling into my bones. Jason was an arrogant man. He thrived on the perception of power, but he lacked the discipline for true strategic planning. I began running a forensic audit on our past 6 months of shared expenses. I noticed discrepancies right away. His executive salary was substantial, but his recent spending patterns were entirely disproportionate. There were massive unexplained withdrawals masked as corporate expenses. Luxury jewelry purchases, high-end dinners at restaurants I had never been to, and massive cash deposits. He funneled funds to a real estate escrow account. He was bleeding funds from somewhere else, and he was using our divorce as a smokescreen to hide his tracks. A knock at the door interrupted my financial autopsy. I froze. Only one person had this address, the hospital social worker. I slowly approached the door and looked through the peephole. Standing in the dimly lit hallway was David. He was married to my sister-in-law, Natalie. David was a 36-year-old corporate lawyer, a brilliant and principled African-American man who had always seemed out of place in Jason and his extremely pretentious and image-obsessed family. Unlike Patricia and Natalie, who thrived on gossip and tearing others down, David operated with quiet integrity. I unlatched the deadbolt and opened the door. David stood there looking deeply uncomfortable, holding a brown paper bag, smelling of warm soup and fresh bread. He took one look at my pale face and sighed heavily. "I come in peace, Claire," he said softly. "I brought food. I figured Jason blocked your cards." I stepped aside, letting him in. "Why are you here, David?" I asked, keeping my voice guarded. "If Natalie finds out you are helping me, Patricia will strike. She will have your head on a platter." David set the bag on the kitchenette counter and loosened his tie. "Let them try. I am sick of the charade. I came because you need to know what Jason is spinning to the family. He did not just file for divorce, Claire. He went nuclear." I sat on the edge of the stiff bed, bracing myself. "Tell me." David pulled up a chair. "Jason told Patricia and Natalie that you have been faking the severity of your cancer. He claims you manipulated the medical reports to extort lifelong alimony. He played the victim perfectly. He even cried. He told them he had to drain the accounts to protect his assets from your so-called financial abuse." A harsh laugh escaped my throat. Financial abuse. I paid for his entire education. I bought his first tailored suit. "I know," David said gently. "But Patricia ate it up. She is already calling her country club friends, painting you as a gold digger who used a minor health scare to trap her son. And it gets worse. Jason did not just take your vehicle, he used it to move Brittany in yesterday." "Brittany?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. His new assistant David confirmed, his expression twisting with disgust. "She is 26. Jason introduced her to Patricia last night. They are already planning to remodel your kitchen." I processed the information. Jason was moving fast, too fast. He was trying to establish a new normal before the dust settled, banking on my physical weakness to keep me compliant. He wanted me broken, destitute, and begging for a settlement. He had severely miscalculated. "Thank you for telling me," I said, my voice steady. "But you taking this risk to warn me is extremely dangerous." "Why do it?" David looked me right in the eyes. "Because I am a lawyer who believes in actual justice, and I watch that family tear down anyone who does not serve their ego." "You are a good person, Claire. You did not deserve this. Jason thinks he is a genius, but he is getting sloppy." He stood up to leave, buttoning his suit jacket. As he reached the door, he paused and pulled a folded legal notepad page from his pocket. He placed it on the table next to my laptop. "I cannot formally represent you, Claire," he said quietly. "I have a strict conflict of interest. But I can tell you that Jason has been incredibly reckless at his tech firm. He thinks his upcoming corporate merger will wipe his accounting slate clean. If I were a supply chain expert looking for a missing link, I would follow the money." He gave me a respectful nod and stepped out into the hallway, closing the door softly behind him. I stared quietly at the folded paper left on the table. The fluorescent lights of the recovery room pierced my eyelids before I was fully conscious. A dull heat radiated from my chest, anchored by tight bandages and the numbness of anesthesia. I tasted dry cotton. An attending nurse adjusted my intravenous line, quietly informing me the lumpectomy was successful. I nodded, exhausted, letting my heavy eyelids drift shut. But the restorative sleep I desperately needed was shattered by the sharp vibration of my phone on the tray table. My supply chain instincts, honed by managing global crises, overrode the painkillers. I forced my eyes open, grabbed the device, and unlocked the screen. I saw a synchronized, devastating strike on my financial infrastructure. My banking application displayed a cascading series of alerts, each a calculated blow from Jason. An outgoing transfer of $82,000 had been executed from our primary savings account, leaving a balance of zero. Another notification showed our shared checking account drained of $15,000. He had systematically detached my name from our shared credit profiles, leaving me with only my personal card and its modest limit. I stared at the digital numbers, the cold reality of my husband's betrayal settling over me like a lead blanket. He had not just abandoned me during surgery. He executed a financial slaughter to ensure I had no resources to fight back. I did not cry. Crying was an inefficient use of energy I no longer possessed. Instead, I opened my vehicle tracking application. My customized sport utility vehicle, which I had purchased in full and registered under both our names for insurance purposes, was no longer parked in the hospital garage. The positioning system showed it idling in the driveway of a luxury apartment complex downtown. Jason had taken my car. He stripped my assets and left me stranded with a growing stack of medical bills that would undoubtedly fall entirely under my name. My breathing hitched the monitor beside my bed, beeping a rapid warning as my heart rate spiked. I forced myself to inhale slowly, counting the seconds, commanding my body to calm down. Panic was a luxury I could not afford. I needed a logistical roadmap to navigate the ruins of my marriage. Before I could begin formulating a plan, a sudden flurry of chaotic energy erupted in the adjacent recovery bay. The heavy curtain dividing my space from the patient Alex Smith was yanked back slightly. A senior hospital administrator, a man I had seen earlier bossing around the nursing staff, practically sprinted into the room. His tailored suit looked out of place among the medical equipment, and his face was flushed with panic. He bypassed my bed entirely and stopped at the edge of Alex's bay, his posture folding into a stance of absolute deference. "Is everything to your exact specifications, sir?" the administrator asked, his voice trembling with an unmistakable layer of fear. "We can have you moved to the executive recovery suite on the top floor immediately. It is much more private, and we have a dedicated surgical team ready to monitor your appendectomy recovery around the clock." I turned my head slightly, wincing at the pull on my chest, to look at the man who had agreed to marry me just hours prior. Alex Smith lay against his pillows, looking pale but entirely unbothered by the administrative panic happening around him. He waved his hand in a dismissive, commanding gesture that spoke volumes about his usual authority. "I am fine right here," Alex said, his deep voice carrying a sharp edge of irritation. "Keep it quiet. I do not want any internal memos circulating about my location or my health status. If anyone asks, I am not here." The administrator nodded vigorously, backing away a few steps. "Of course, sir. Complete discretion is our top priority. We will restrict access to this floor immediately." As the suit hurried out of the ward, two nurses stood near the supply cart at the foot of my bed. They were organizing bandages, but their eyes were fixed on the curtain separating me from Alex. The younger nurse, her hands shaking slightly as she unwrapped a sterile syringe, leaned close to her older colleague. Her voice dropped to a frantic whisper, but the acoustics of the quiet recovery room carried her words directly to my ears. "Do you have any idea who that man actually is?" The young nurse whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. I saw the unredacted intake forms when the administrator bypassed the standard protocol. "That is not just some random guy named Alex Smith. That is Alexander Pierce." The older nurse gasped softly, dropping a roll of medical tape. "The billionaire?" she asked, her voice tight. "The venture capital guy who just bought out half the tech sector in the city?" "Yes," the younger nurse replied quickly. "They brought him in under an alias to prevent the stock market from reacting to his emergency surgery. He practically owns this hospital wing. We have to be incredibly careful." Alexander Pierce. The name echoed in my foggy, medicated brain. My husband, Jason, worked as a vice president at a tech firm that was currently the target of a massive, highly publicized corporate acquisition. The acquiring entity was an aggressive venture capital conglomerate. The founder and chief executive officer of that conglomerate was Alexander Pierce. I stared at the ceiling as the heavy doses of surgical painkillers dragged me back toward unconsciousness. The man in the next bed, the man who had handed me a napkin and calmly agreed to my bitter, spiteful marriage proposal, was the financial apex predator about to devour my ex-husband's entire career. I tried to put the pieces together to analyze the monumental leverage sitting just a few feet away from me. But the anesthesia was too strong. My eyelids fluttered shut, and I slipped into complete darkness, a faint, dangerous smile resting on my face, as I realized my fake fiancé was the ultimate weapon. 2 days later, the hospital discharged me. The physical pain in my chest was a sharp, constant throb, a relentless reminder of the surgical blade that had removed the cancerous tissue. But that physical agony paled in comparison to the administrative nightmare waiting for me at the billing desk. The clerk, a woman with tired eyes and a stack of printed forms, informed me that my primary health insurance was currently listed as under review by the provider. Jason had initiated a coverage freeze, likely claiming a separation event to stall the payouts. He had executed this administrative strike while I was bleeding on an operating table. The clerk handed me an itemized invoice for the out-of-pocket expenses. The number at the bottom of the page was staggering. Jason had left me holding the bag for a premium surgical procedure, ensuring I would wake up to a mountain of immediate medical debt. I did not call him. I did not send a frantic pleading message demanding an explanation. Pleading is a tactic for the powerless, and I refused to operate from a deficit. I told my cab driver to bypass the upscale neighborhood where we had lived. I knew better than to return to our marital home. Jason would have already changed the digital security codes, locked the deadbolts, and likely moved his new life into my meticulously decorated living room. Instead, I gave the driver the address of a cheap short-term rental I had booked from my hospital bed using a hidden emergency credit card Jason knew nothing about. The apartment was located on the gritty outskirts of the city. It was a bleak, cramped studio with flickering fluorescent lights, peeling beige wallpaper, and a mattress that felt like a slab of concrete. The radiator hissed in the corner, leaking a metallic smell into the stale air. It was a severe downgrade from the luxury I had financed for the past 7 years, but it was secure. I did not view this room as a sanctuary. It was my operational command center. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed, carefully adjusting my posture to avoid pulling at my stitches. I opened my laptop and connected to the unreliable wireless network. My supply chain background had trained me to view chaos as a series of data points waiting to be organized. When a global shipping route collapses, you do not sit on the dock and weep over the lost cargo. You map the disruption, identify the bottlenecks, and reroute your assets. I applied that exact same clinical methodology to my destroyed marriage. I compartmentalized the betrayal, shoving the emotional devastation into a locked box in my mind. Jason was no longer my husband. He was a compromised vendor in my logistical network, a liability that needed to be audited, exposed, and systematically dismantled. I began the financial triage. The bleeding was severe and deliberately orchestrated. Jason had completely locked me out of our primary joint accounts. He had changed the passwords, altered the security authentication protocols, and redirected the electronic statements to a private server. But Jason, for all his corporate arrogance, constantly underestimated my meticulous nature. He thrived on the perception of power, but he lacked the discipline for true strategic planning. I pulled up my encrypted digital archives, accessing years of tax returns, cross-referenced banking statements, and digital footprints he had carelessly left behind on our shared cloud drive. I ran a forensic audit on our past 12 months of shared expenses. The numbers painted a very clear, very damning picture of premeditated sabotage. Jason had not just drained our primary savings of $82,000. He had been systematically siphoning smaller increments of cash for months, structuring the transfers just under the threshold that would trigger a banking alert. But as I dug deeper into his expense reports, a glaring discrepancy emerged. I mapped out his financial logistics, comparing his net income against his cash flow burn rate. Jason earned a substantial salary as a vice president at his technology firm. However, the lifestyle he was currently funding far exceeded his legitimate compensation package. The math simply did not align. I found digital receipts for high-end dinners at exclusive restaurants on nights he claimed to be working late. There were massive, unexplained withdrawals, masked as vague corporate expenses. I traced a series of recurring payments to a luxury car dealership, specifically a lease agreement for a high-end sports car that certainly was not parked in our garage. He was funneling massive amounts of capital into a private real estate escrow account. He was funding a shadow life, purchasing luxury assets, and maintaining a lifestyle that required millions. I stared at the glowing spreadsheet on my screen, my analytical mind highlighting the red flags. Jason bled funds from an external, highly lucrative source. He was injecting illicit capital into his personal accounts and using the chaos of our sudden divorce as a smokescreen to hide the sudden influx of wealth. He thought a sick, discarded wife would be too overwhelmed by medical trauma to notice the glaring anomalies in his balance sheets. He assumed I would be too busy fighting for basic survival to question how he could afford to buy a second luxury property while allegedly draining his savings to pay for lawyers. I leaned back against the cheap headboard, a cold and calculated anger settling deep into my bones. Jason was desperate and reckless. He was moving capital with the clumsy arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. He wanted me broken, destitute, and begging for a miserable settlement. He had severely miscalculated the woman he married. I did not just manage supply chains. I optimized them by eliminating toxic variables. I saved the encrypted files to a secure external drive, preparing my arsenal. The pain in my chest throbbed, but my mind was razor sharp. I was ready to hunt. A sharp knock shattered the quiet of my analysis. I froze. Only the social worker had this address. I closed my laptop. Pain flared as I stood a tug against fresh stitches, but I ignored it. I peered through the scratched peephole. Standing in the dimly lit hallway was David. David is 36 years old, an impeccably dressed African-American corporate lawyer and the husband of Jason's entitled sister, Natalie. He had always been the glaring anomaly in my husband's pretentious family. While Patricia and Natalie thrived on superficial gossip, David operated with quiet, unyielding integrity. His brilliant legal mind was matched by his absolute refusal to engage in the family's toxic drama. Seeing his sharp suit contrasting with the grimy walls of my rental sent a spike of high alert through my system. I unlatched the deadbolt, opening the door just enough to block the entrance. "How did you find me, David?" I asked, keeping my voice carefully neutral. He looked deeply uncomfortable in the narrow corridor, holding a brown paper bag that smelled faintly of warm soup. "I tracked the internet protocol address from the medical billing portal when Jason rerouted your invoices," he said softly. "I brought food. Please, Claire, I come in peace." There was no malice in his eyes, only a profound shame. I stepped aside and led him into the cramped studio. He placed the bag on the scuffed kitchenette counter, his gaze sweeping over the flickering fluorescent lights and the concrete hard mattress. His jaw tightened. "You should not be here, David," I said, leaning against the wall to support my aching chest. "If Natalie finds out you came to see me, Patricia will have your head on a platter. They will make your life a living hell." "Let them try," David replied, his voice thick with disgust. "I am sick of the charade. I came because you need to know exactly what Jason is spinning to the family. He did not just file for divorce, Claire. He went nuclear. He is trying to completely destroy your credibility before you secure legal representation." I crossed my arms, maintaining my supply chain mindset. "Tell me the logistical layout. What is his narrative?" David pulled out one of the rickety dining chairs and sat leaning forward. "Jason moved Brittany into your house yesterday." "Brittany?" I asked, narrowing my eyes as my brain rapidly processed the data point. His new executive assistant, David, confirmed, his expression twisting with contempt. "She is 26 years old. Jason introduced her to Patricia last night at a family dinner. They are picking out new tile for your kitchen remodel. He gave her the keys to your sport utility vehicle." I digested the information without a single tear. Jason was moving incredibly fast. He banked on my physical weakness to keep me compliant and too exhausted to fight for my property. He wanted me broken and begging for a settlement. But moving a mistress into the marital home while I was in the hospital was a tactical error. It was arrogant and sloppy. "That is just the property division," I noted coldly. "What is the public relations strategy? What is he telling Patricia and Natalie to justify abandoning me during cancer surgery?" David looked me right in the eyes. "He told them you are faking the severity of your cancer. He claims you manipulated medical reports to extort him for lifelong alimony. He played the victim flawlessly. He actually cried at dinner." He told his mother he had to drain the joint accounts to protect his assets from your financial abuse. A harsh, cynical laugh escaped my throat. Financial abuse. I paid for his entire graduate education. I bought his first tailored suit so he could look the part of a rising executive. I managed every domestic crisis so he could focus entirely on his career trajectory. I know, David said gently. I know what you sacrificed for that man. But Patricia ate it up. She is calling her country club friends, painting you as a calculating gold digger who used a lumpectomy to trap her successful son. They are preparing to launch a coordinated smear campaign to ensure you get nothing in the divorce. I stood up straight, ignoring the burning pain in my chest. Jason believes he holds all the leverage. He thinks a sick, discarded wife lacks the capital to hire a decent attorney. That brings me to my second reason for being here, David said, standing up. I cannot formally represent you in court, Claire. I have a strict conflict of interest as his brother-in-law, but I am a corporate lawyer who believes in actual justice. I know how Jason's legal team operates. I know their aggressive tactics, hidden loopholes, and dirty litigation strategies. I am secretly offering to help you navigate this legal minefield. I will review filings, draft counterclaims, and show you how to dismantle his settlement offers. I stared at David. He was risking his marriage, his peace of mind, and his standing with his in-laws to help me. Why do this, I asked. Why risk the wrath of Patricia and Natalie? Because I watch that family tear down anyone who does not serve their inflated egos. David replied, his voice firm. You are a good person, Claire. You have always treated me with genuine respect. You did not deserve to be left bleeding in a hospital while your husband moved his mistress into your home. Jason thinks he is a genius, but he is getting careless. He is relying on your silence. I will not be silent, I assured him, my voice practically dripping with ice. I am going to tear his entire operation down to the studs. David gave me a respectful nod. We will start tonight, he said, pulling an encrypted flash drive from his pocket. We will force him to disclose every hidden asset. We will make him bleed on paper. Jason had absolutely no idea. The following morning, I woke up with a sharp, burning ache radiating from my surgical site. The cheap mattress offered no support, but I pushed through the physical discomfort. I booted up my laptop, navigating to the hospital billing portal. I needed to see exactly how much debt Jason successfully dumped on me before formulating my counterattack. I logged in. The balance read 0. I refreshed the browser, assuming it was a glitch. $0 owed. A green banner indicated the account had been paid in full by a private third party via wire transfer. Jason certainly had not paid it. He wanted me drowning in debt. I stared at the screen. Who had the capital to wipe out a massive surgical bill overnight? My phone buzzed on the counter. It was an unknown number. Hello, I said guardedly. Claire, a deep, resonant voice replied. I see you found my administrative update. I recognized the voice. It was the man from the adjacent hospital bay, the guy who handed me a napkin and agreed to a spiteful marriage proposal. Alex Smith, I said, my tone flat. Why did you pay my hospital bills? I have a very efficient administrative team, Alex replied. I do not like seeing a good strategic mind bogged down by petty medical debt. I want to meet with you. There is a coffee shop 3 blocks from your rental. I will be there in 20 minutes. He hung up. He knew my current address and phone number. He had the liquid capital to instantly erase my medical bill. Alex Smith was not a random patient recovering from appendectomy surgery. I dressed carefully, opting for a dark blazer that hid the bulky bandages. The walk was agonizing, but I maintained a purposeful stride. I was not going to show weakness to a man who demonstrated an alarming level of financial surveillance. The coffee shop was an upscale establishment. I spotted him immediately. The man sitting in the corner booth bore zero resemblance to the hospital patient I met 2 days ago. He wore a tailored navy suit that screamed bespoke craftsmanship. His dark hair was immaculately styled, and his posture radiated effortless authority. He looked up the moment I walked through the door. His sharp eyes locked onto mine. I slid into the booth across from him. He already ordered black coffee for himself and green tea for me. You did your research, I noted. I always do, he said. Before you ask how I found you, understand my security protocol requires thorough background checks on anyone who proposes marriage to me, even as a joke. I crossed my arms. Who are you? Because you are definitely not an average guy named Alex Smith. He took a slow sip of his coffee. You are incredibly observant, Claire. You saw right through the alias. My name is Alexander Pierce. The name hit me like a shockwave. Alexander Pierce. He was a self-made billionaire. He was the founder and chief executive officer of the most aggressive venture capital firm in the country. More importantly, his conglomerate was finalizing a corporate acquisition. The target of that acquisition was the tech firm where Jason served as vice president. The man sitting across from me was about to become my ex-husband's ultimate boss. You are the apex predator acquiring Jason's company, I stated. Alex smiled a genuine, dangerous expression. I prefer the term strategic optimizer. But yes, I buy bloated companies, gut the toxic corporate parasites, draining resources, and streamline the operation. Your husband is exactly the kind of middle management liability I routinely eliminate. I despise men like Jason. They produce nothing of value. They simply extract capital and claim credit for the labor of others. He paused, his gaze softening slightly as he looked at me. I heard you on the phone in the recovery room. I heard the financial hit he orchestrated while you were under the knife. Most people would have shattered. They would have cried or panicked. You did not. You immediately started calculating a recovery route. I admire that level of resilience. It is a rare trait in the corporate world, and even rarer in personal crises. I do not need your pity, Alexander, I said firmly. I do not deal in pity, Claire, he replied instantly. I deal in investments. Paying your medical bills was not charity. It was a retainer. You have a brilliant, analytical mind. You mapped out your ex-husband's betrayal like a supply chain disruption. I respect people who refuse to break under pressure. You took a catastrophic blow and instantly started building a framework for survival. I studied his face. The billionaire before me was not playing a game. He saw a kindred spirit, someone who understood the mechanics of power and survival. Jason thought he could discard me because I was no longer a useful stepping stone. He assumed my cancer made me weak. But sitting across from Alexander Pierce, I realized my illness had inadvertently placed me in the exact right room at the exact right time to meet the one man capable of obliterating Jason's entire world. He possessed the structural authority I lacked. You called paying my bills a retainer, I said, leaning forward slightly, ignoring the sting in my chest. So what exactly are you hiring me for? Alex leaned forward to meet me, his dark eyes gleaming with a focused, predatory intelligence. Our conversation in the hospital was initially a spiteful joke, Claire, he said softly. But given our mutual disdain for Jason and his specific brand of corporate entitlement, I think we should turn that joke into a weapon. We can form a strategic alliance. You want to destroy his life, and I want to expose his financial liabilities before the acquisition. We will use your supply chain expertise to track his hidden assets and my corporate authority to crush him. We should turn our fake engagement into a reality today. I stared at him. The sheer audacity of the proposition hung in the air between us, mingling with the rich scent of roasted coffee. A fake engagement was an incredibly insane proposition, yet it made perfect sense. A tactical alliance. The billionaire sitting across from me was not offering a romantic rescue. He was offering a corporate partnership to execute a mutually beneficial demolition. Are you seriously suggesting we stage a high-profile relationship just to obliterate a middle management tech executive? I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. It seems like an extreme deployment of resources for someone you could easily fire with a single email tomorrow. Alex leaned back against the leather booth, his dark eyes fixed on mine. I could terminate his employment today, yes, but termination is just a severance package. It allows him to spin the narrative, secure a golden parachute, and fail upward into another company. That is highly inefficient. My venture capital firm is in the final stages of acquiring his technology company. The ink on the merger contract dries in exactly 3 weeks. During an acquisition of this scale, The financial architecture is incredibly chaotic. Bad actors like Jason rely on that chaos to bury their liabilities. I want to uncover those liabilities before we absorb them completely. I want him terminated with absolute cause, stripped of his equity and facing federal charges. I nodded, understanding the logistics immediately. You want a forensic audit? But if your corporate team requests one now, he will panic and destroy the evidence. You need an inside operative to gather the data. Exactly, Alex said, a dangerous smile spreading across his face. And you need unparalleled access to the upper echelon corporate circles that Jason is desperately trying to infiltrate right now. A discarded sick wife can be easily shut out of those rooms, but the fiancé of the new parent company chief executive officer, that woman holds universal clearance. Nobody can lock you out when you arrive on my arm. The logic was flawless. Jason thrived on social capital. He built his entire sense of superiority on proximity to power. If I walked into his corporate merger gala as the future wife of his new boss, the psychological destruction would be catastrophic. But more importantly, the access would allow me to gather the hard evidence I needed to prove his financial crimes. What are the operational parameters of this alliance? I asked, switching fully into my supply chain director persona. I need to know exactly what is expected of me moving forward. Alex mirrored my professional tone. We present a united front. We attend the upcoming merger events together. You will have full access to my corporate intelligence resources, my private security, and my legal team. In exchange, you use your analytical expertise to track down the exact mechanisms Jason is using to embezzle funds. You find the leak and I provide the heavy hammer to smash the pipe. I have a lead, I told him, deciding to trust my new partner. My brother-in-law David is a corporate lawyer. He despises Jason. He gave me a tip last night. He told me to follow the money and look into something called the Olympus Project. Alex narrowed his eyes, his mind clearly racing through internal data files. The Olympus Project. That rings a bell. It is supposed to be an experimental software development branch within his firm, but the financial returns have been suspiciously vague. If Jason is using a dummy project to siphon corporate funds, he is committing federal fraud. He is using it to fund a luxury lifestyle for his 26-year-old assistant, I said coldly. He moved her into my house yesterday. He bought her a luxury car. He is funneling capital into a private real estate escrow account. He thinks the chaos of your acquisition will wipe his accounting slate clean before anyone notices the missing capital. Alex exhaled sharply, a sound of pure disgust. The arrogance of mediocrity never fails to astound me. He thinks he can outsmart a venture capital audit. We are going to make an example of him, Claire. We are going to dismantle his life from the inside out, brick by stolen brick. But to do that effectively, we need to solidify your cover immediately. You cannot stay in that cheap rental. It is a severe security risk, and it contradicts our entire narrative. I am not moving into your penthouse, Alex, I warned him. We are business partners. I will not compromise my hard-earned independence for this plan. I would never ask you to compromise your independence, he replied smoothly. I own a secure corporate apartment downtown. It is fully furnished, heavily guarded, and entirely yours for the duration of this operation. You need a safe space to recover from your surgery and a clean command center to run your financial forensics. Consider it a necessary operational expense to ensure that our shared objectives are met without any unexpected interference from your rather pathetic ex-husband. I analyzed the offer carefully. It was highly practical. It was secure. It gave me the high ground. I reached across the table and extended my hand. No romance, Alexander. Strictly business. We maintain the engagement facade in public, we gather the irrefutable evidence we need behind closed doors, and we completely destroy him. Alex took my hand. His grip was firm, warm, and unexpectedly reassuring. His dark eyes locked onto mine with a fierce intensity that sent a sudden, unscripted jolt of electricity straight to my core. Strictly business, Claire, he agreed, though the slight smirk on his face suggested he was thoroughly enjoying the dynamic between us. He released my hand and pulled a sleek black smartphone from his suit jacket. He typed a rapid message and set the device face down on the table. My security team is en route to your rental to retrieve your belongings. My private driver is waiting outside to take you to the corporate apartment. Your logistical nightmare ends today. I stood up, the pain in my chest momentarily forgotten. For the first time since the doctor handed me that cancer diagnosis, I did not feel like a helpless victim. I felt like a lethal predator preparing for a satisfying hunt. Jason wanted a war. He wanted to strip my assets and leave me to die in the collateral damage. He had no idea that I just formed a strategic alliance with a billionaire, and we were about to orchestrate the most spectacular corporate execution in history. I directed Alex's private driver to make one final stop at my temporary rental before heading to the secure corporate apartment. I needed to personally retrieve my encrypted hard drive and a few highly sensitive documents I had hidden under the concrete hard mattress. Trusting a security team to pack my clothes was one thing, but allowing anyone else to handle the raw data of my impending war against Jason was a logistical vulnerability I could not permit. The driver offered to escort me upstairs, but I declined, insisting I would only be 5 minutes. The physical exertion of walking down the dingy, flickering hallway sent a fresh wave of burning pain through my chest, but the adrenaline masking my surgical recovery was still running strong. I unlocked the deadbolt and stepped inside the stifling room, immediately grabbing my laptop bag. Before I could even zip the main compartment, a sharp, aggressive pounding rattled the flimsy wooden door. It was not a polite knock. It was a demand for entry. I froze, my hand hovering over my bag. Alex had said his security team was en route, but they would have called first. I moved silently to the door and peered through the scratched glass lens. Standing in the hallway were Patricia and Natalie. My mother-in-law wore a pristine white cashmere coat that looked entirely absurd against the peeling wallpaper of the cheap complex. Her blonde hair was sprayed into a stiff, immovable helmet of perfection. Beside her, Natalie clutched a designer handbag, her face contorted into a familiar sneer of elitist disgust as she surveyed the grimy hallway. Jason had clearly given them the address he scraped from my emergency credit card alert before I locked him out of my tracking data. They had come to finish the job he started. I considered ignoring them, letting them pound on the door until they gave up and left. But a strategic retreat is only valuable if it serves a larger purpose. Avoiding them now would only embolden their narrative that I was weak, broken, and hiding. I needed to see exactly what their tactical objective was. I unlocked the door and pulled it open, blocking the threshold with my body. "Look at this absolute squalor," Patricia declared, pushing past my shoulder with a forceful shove that sent a sickening jolt of pain directly into my surgical stitches. I stumbled back, forced to let them cross the threshold. Natalie followed immediately, waving her hand in front of her face, as if the very air inside the apartment was toxic. She kicked the door shut behind her, trapping me inside the confined space, with the two most toxic women I had ever encountered. "What are you doing here, Patricia?" I asked, forcing my voice to remain completely monotone. "You are trespassing." "We are here to finalize the inevitable," Patricia snapped, pacing the short length of the room. She wrinkled her nose at the hissing radiator. "Jason is a vice president. He is a rising star in the tech industry. He cannot have his reputation dragged through the mud by a bitter, discarded woman living in a slum. We are here to ensure this transition happens quietly and efficiently." Natalie scoffed, crossing her arms over her chest. "You really let yourself go, Claire. You look terrible." Jason was right to leave. Nobody wants to come home to a hospital ward. He needs a vibrant partner, not a medical burden. I maintained a flat, clinical expression. I analyzed their posture, their aggressive posturing, and the manila folder Patricia was clutching tightly in her manicured hand. They were not here just to hurl insults. They were here on a specific errand. Jason was too much of a coward to face me himself, so he sent his mother and sister to do his dirty work. "Get to the point," I said, leaning against the kitchenette counter to support my weight. "My time is extremely valuable, and you are wasting it." Patricia scoffed at my defiance. She marched over to the small, scuffed dining table and slammed the manila folder down. She flipped it open, revealing a stack of legal documents. On top was a standard quitclaim deed printed on heavy legal paper. She pulled a gold-plated pen from her designer purse and dropped it onto the documents with a sharp clatter. "Sign it!" Patricia demanded, her voice echoing off the bare walls. "You are going to sign over your half of the marital home immediately. That house is worth $1.2 million and it belongs to Jason. He earned it. He paid for it. You are going to walk away with nothing, just like you came into this family with nothing." I stared at the legal document, the sheer audacity of the demand momentarily stunning me. I paid the down payment on that house using my own corporate bonuses. I managed the mortgage payments while Jason was still paying off his student loans. That house was my asset, and Jason was trying to steal it through intimidation. "I am not signing away a $1.2 million property, Patricia," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are out of your mind if you think a cheap ambush will force me to surrender my equity." Patricia stepped closer, her eyes flashing with malicious intent. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering cruelly on my bandaged chest. "You will sign it, Claire. Jason deserves a healthy woman who can give him heirs, not a defective liability. He deserves a partner who can build a future, not a sick woman who drains his resources. Brittany is young, vibrant, and capable of giving this family what you never could. You are dead weight." The words were designed to break me, to strike at the absolute core of my vulnerability as a woman recovering from cancer. Patricia expected me to crumble, to weep, to let the emotional devastation force me into submission. But she did not understand that my emotional centers had already been sealed off. I did not see a mother-in-law delivering a crushing personal blow. I saw an unhinged adversary making a critical tactical error. She was delivering a direct, actionable threat, and she was doing it in a room where she had zero structural power. Natalie chimed in, stepping up beside her mother to reinforce the attack. "Jason already moved Brittany in. They are picking out nursery colors. The house is hers now. If you do not sign that paper, Jason will drag this out in court for years. He will bury you in legal fees until you cannot afford your own cancer treatments. He will make sure you die penniless. Sign the deed, Claire. It is the only way you walk out of this with a shred of dignity." I stood perfectly still. The pain in my chest was a steady rhythmic burn, but my mind was operating at maximum efficiency. I recognized the strategy. Shock and awe. Overwhelm the target, present a catastrophic alternative, and force immediate compliance. But I was a supply chain director. I handled catastrophic alternatives before breakfast. I slowly reached my left hand behind my back, resting it casually on the counter. With a subtle, practiced movement, I tapped the side button on my smartwatch twice. The tiny red indicator light blinked to life, confirming the audio recording function was active and capturing every single word echoing in the small room. Patricia mistook my deliberate silence for submission. She smiled, showcasing her expensive dental veneers, and leaned her manicured hands against the cheap laminate of my kitchenette counter. She thought she had won. She thought the mention of a new woman replacing me had dealt the fatal blow to my ego. But my ego was tied to my competence. Right now, Patricia was handing me a masterclass in actionable extortion. "I am glad you are finally listening," Patricia said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Because if you choose to be difficult about this house, I have other avenues to ensure your cooperation. You think you are so untouchable with your corporate job. But you forget who I play tennis with every Tuesday." I kept my expression blank, letting the smartwatch on my wrist record the ambient noise of the hissing radiator and the sharp intake of Natalie's breath as she anticipated her mother's next strike. "I sit on the charity gala committee with Richard Sterling," Patricia announced proudly, dropping the name of a senior board member at my retail conglomerate. "I know your company has a strict morality clause. How do you think Richard would react if I called him to inform him that his director of supply chain is engaged in a messy divorce involving emotional instability? I will have you fired for moral turpitude before the end of the quarter." The sheer ignorance of her threat was astounding. Patricia operated in a world of socialite gossip where reputations were ruined over poorly chosen dresses. She genuinely believed corporate board members at a Fortune 500 retail giant made executive termination decisions based on the bitter phone calls of a disgruntled mother-in-law. Richard Sterling cared about global logistics, not my marital status. But legally, her ignorance was my greatest asset. She was explicitly threatening my employment to force the transfer of a real estate asset. It was textbook extortion. Mom is not bluffing. Claire Natalie chimed in, stepping closer to the quitclaim deed. She has board members on speed dial. If you lose your job, you lose your health insurance. Good luck paying for your cancer treatments without corporate benefits. Jason is cutting you off his plan. Just sign the paper. It is your only option. I looked at the gold-plated pen resting on the document. I looked at Natalie, whose eyes were wide with cruelty. Then I looked at Patricia, convinced she had orchestrated a flawless checkmate. They had explicitly detailed their intent to ruin me financially and medically if I did not surrender a $1.2 million asset. My smartwatch captured every syllable of their blackmail. I had exactly what I needed. I slowly reached out my hand. Patricia let out a soft, triumphant sigh. My fingers brushed the cold metal of the pen. I picked it up, feeling its weight. I held it for a brief second, letting the silence stretch. Then I casually tossed the pen over my shoulder. It hit the floor and rolled under the sofa. Patricia gasped loudly, her posture entirely rigid. "What do you think you are doing?" she demanded. "I am conducting a basic risk assessment, Patricia," I said, my voice dropping to a glacial, authoritative tone. "And I have determined your leverage is non-existent. You are attempting to extort a supply chain director using country club gossip. Let me explain how this works." I took a slow, deliberate step forward, forcing Patricia to take an involuntary step backward. "You do not have the power to fire me," I stated coldly. "If you call Richard Sterling to slander my name, my corporate legal team will issue a cease and desist order immediately. Furthermore, your threat to weaponize my health insurance to force a property transfer violates federal law. You just threatened to interfere with a cancer patient's medical care to steal real estate. You just committed felony extortion on tape." Natalie shrank back nervously, bumping hard into the wall. "You are bluffing," she stammered. "I did not tap my watch or reveal my recording. Keeping the enemy blind to surveillance is the first rule of corporate warfare." I simply maintained eye contact with Patricia, watching the color drain from her face. The absolute certainty in my voice shattered her confidence. She realized she had walked into an arena she did not understand. "I am not signing your deed," I said, pointing toward the hallway. "And you are going to leave my apartment right now. If you ever approach me again without legal counsel present, I will have you arrested for harassment and trespassing. Gather your garbage and get out." Patricia opened her mouth to argue, but the words died. She snatched the folder off the table, her hands shaking with a mixture of fury and sudden fear. She left her gold pen behind. "Jason will destroy you!" Patricia hissed venomously, backing toward the door. "You will regret this." "Tell Jason to bring a better lawyer," I replied, "and tell him to stop hiding behind his mother." Natalie scrambled out the door first, running down the hallway to escape the suffocating tension. Patricia followed, her white cashmere coat swishing angrily. She shot me one final glare before turning on her heel. I stepped forward and slammed the door shut, locking the deadbolt. The click echoed in the studio. I stood alone, listening to their heels retreating down the corridor. I tapped the side button on my smartwatch to stop the recording. The audio file saved to my cloud drive, securing the asset. The pain in my chest was a sharp burn, but a profound sense of tactical satisfaction washed over me. Jason sent his family to break my spirit. Instead, they handed me an undeniable digital confession of federal extortion. I needed to contact Alexander Pierce to finalize our operational timeline. Jason thought he was playing a simple game of intimidation, but he was already caught in a crushing tactical vice. I stood in the center of the cramped studio, the echo of the slamming door still ringing in my ears. Jason thought he was playing a simple game of intimidation, but he was already caught in a crushing tactical vice. As the adrenaline began to recede, leaving a sharp throbbing ache across my chest, I noticed a shadow shift in the narrow gap beneath the doorway. Someone was still lingering in the hallway. I tensed my hand instinctively, reaching for the heavy brass lamp on the side table. I approached the door with silent, measured steps and peered through the scratched glass of the peephole. It was David. He had apparently accompanied his wife and mother-in-law, likely forced to act as their reluctant chauffeur for this ambush, but had remained hidden in the corridor out of sheer disgust for their tactics. Now, with Patricia and Natalie already marching toward the elevators, David stepped back toward my door. He knocked once, a single sharp rap that sounded entirely different from Patricia's frantic pounding. I unlatched the deadbolt and opened the door an inch, keeping my body braced against the frame. David stood there, his impeccably tailored suit contrasting sharply with the dim, flickering hallway lights. He looked over his shoulder to ensure his wife and mother-in-law were out of earshot. His face was a mask of professional stoicism, but his eyes conveyed a deep, unspoken apology. He did not say a word. He simply reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a standard yellow legal notepad, and slid it through the narrow opening of the doorway onto the edge of my kitchenette counter. He gave me a single, decisive nod. It was the look of a man who had just crossed a massive ethical line to do what was morally right. Without waiting for a response, David turned on his heel and walked swiftly down the hall to join his toxic family at the elevator banks. I closed the door, sliding the deadbolt back into place with a definitive click. I leaned against the cool wood, my breathing shallow to protect my stitches, and looked at the yellow legal pad resting on the cheap laminate counter. David was a meticulous corporate lawyer. He never acted on impulse, and he certainly never left a paper trail without a calculated reason. He was putting his marriage and his professional standing at risk by interacting with me. If Jason or Patricia found out he was aiding the enemy, they would scorch his life to ashes. I walked over to the counter and picked up the notepad. It felt heavy with implication. The first page was entirely blank, a clever decoy in case Natalie had glanced at it in the car. I flipped to the second page. Right in the center of the yellow paper, written in David's precise, unmistakable handwriting, was a single cryptic directive: follow the money. I stared at the ink, the letters burning into my vision. The Olympus Project. The name sounded arrogant, grandiose, and entirely on brand for a narcissist like Jason. It was not a term I recognized from his usual dinner table boasting. Jason loved to talk about his corporate conquests, detailing his generic software rollouts to anyone who would listen, but he had never once mentioned Olympus. That deliberate silence was a massive red flag. In supply chain logistics, the silence surrounding a major operation usually indicates an off-the-books liability. I brought the notepad to my small desk and opened my laptop. I had already extracted gigabytes of data from Jason's digital footprint, but I had been looking for standard marital asset dissipation. David was pointing me toward something much larger. He was pointing me toward corporate malfeasance. If Jason was bleeding funds from his employer to finance his new life with Brittany, it completely explained the math that had not added up earlier. I launched my encrypted file directory and initiated a deep search query across the archived emails, tax documents, and cloud backups I had secured before the lockout. I typed the word Olympus into the search bar. The progress wheel spun for what felt like an eternity. I ignored the throbbing pain in my chest, my focus narrowing into a laser-sharp beam. I was no longer a recovering patient in a dingy studio. I was a hunter tracking a very careless prey. The search yielded 3 hidden folders buried deep within a nested directory, disguised as routine software maintenance logs. I cracked open the first folder. It contained a series of vendor payment authorizations from Jason's tech firm. All the payments were approved directly by Jason under his vice president credentials. The vendor was listed as Olympus Consulting Solutions. I pulled up the state business registry on a separate browser tab and ran a background check on the limited liability company. Olympus Consulting Solutions had been incorporated exactly 8 months ago. The registered agent was a shell company based in a state with strict corporate anonymity laws, but the mailing address for the invoices raised an immediate alarm. It was the same zip code as the luxury apartment complex where Jason had moved my vehicle. My analytical mind assembled the pieces with terrifying speed. Jason had created a phantom vendor. He was authorizing corporate payouts from his employer for consulting services that did not exist. The money flowed out of the tech firm's operational budget into the Olympus Shell account and straight into Jason's private control. He was using stolen corporate funds to lease the sports car, buy the expensive jewelry, and finance the luxury home for his 26-year-old assistant. He was an embezzler. David had just handed me the nuclear codes to my ex-husband's entire existence. This was no longer a simple ugly divorce over a $1.2 million house. Jason was committing federal financial crimes. He was betting his freedom on the assumption that Alexander Pierce's upcoming venture capital acquisition would create enough accounting chaos to hide his dummy vendor payouts. He thought the corporate merger would serve as a firewall burying his theft under mountains of transition paperwork. I picked up my smartphone feeling the weight of the audio recording of Patricia's extortion and the explosive implications of David's note. I needed absolute structural authority to execute this strike. I needed to move beyond the boundaries of family court and step into the realm of corporate destruction. I dialed the private number Alex had given me earlier at the coffee shop. The line rang only twice before his deep, resonant voice answered. "Claire," Alex said, sounding alert and focused. "Is there a disruption in the timeline?" I stared at the yellow legal pad, a cold, triumphant smile spreading across my face. "No disruption, Alexander," I replied, my voice steady and lethal. "I just secured the vulnerability in his supply chain. My brother-in-law left me a breadcrumb, and it led straight to a massive off-the-books liability. I know exactly how Jason is funding his new life. We need to accelerate our operational timeline immediately." "Tell me what you found," Alex commanded, the predatory edge returning to his tone. "I found his phantom vendor," I stated clearly. "It is a dummy corporation called the Olympus Project. Jason is actively embezzling from the company you are about to acquire. He is a thief, Alexander, and I am ready to burn him to the ground. Send the car. I am moving into the corporate apartment tonight." Alex let out a low, dangerous laugh over the line. "I will have my security detail at your door in exactly 12 minutes. Pack your data drives, we have a war to plan." I ended the call and closed my laptop, sliding it securely into my bag, alongside David's yellow notepad. I looked around the bleak room one last time. Jason thought he could leave me in the dark, suffocating under medical debt and intimidation. He thought a sick wife was a defeated wife. He failed to understand that stripping away my comfort only sharpened my survival instincts. I picked up my bag, ignored the burning in my surgical wounds, and walked out the door to meet my new partner. Jason's countdown had officially begun. A black vehicle idled at the curb, its tinted windows masking the interior. A man in a dark suit opened the door. I slid into the leather interior, the quiet hum of the engine instantly isolating me from the street. The drive downtown was swift. I organized the data points I was about to present. The corporate apartment occupied the top floor of a high-security residential tower. The private elevator opened directly into a sprawling, minimalist living space encased in floor-to-ceiling glass. My attention locked onto the mahogany dining table that had been converted into a tactical war room. High-resolution monitors glowed in the dim light, cables snaking across the polished wood. Alex stood near the glass wall, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He had discarded his suit jacket, his pristine white shirt sleeves rolled up to the elbows. As the elevator doors shut, he turned. His dark eyes swept over me, assessing my physical state with clinical precision before locking onto the laptop bag slung over my shoulder. "You look like you just survived an ambush," Alex noted, setting his glass down on a side table. "I survived an extortion attempt," I corrected, walking to the makeshift command center. "Patricia and Natalie ambushed me at the rental. They demanded I sign a quit-claim deed under threat of corporate sabotage. They wanted to weaponize my health insurance to force a real estate transfer." A terrifying anger flashed across Alex's face. He took a step toward me, his voice dropping to a lethal register. "Did they touch you, Claire?" I raised my chin. "They tried to intimidate me. They failed miserably. I recorded the entire interaction on my smartwatch. I have Patricia executing a federal extortion threat on audio. But that is just a side quest. The real prize is what David left behind." I pulled out the yellow legal notepad, placing it on the center of the table. I tapped my finger against the handwritten note. Follow the money. Look into the Olympus project. Alex stepped closer, his physical proximity sending an unexpected spike of heat through my system. He stared at David's precise handwriting. I have authorized my corporate intelligence division to bypass the standard acquisition firewalls, he said, pulling up a secure terminal. We have unrestricted access to Jason's entire corporate intranet. The executives think we are running preliminary compliance checks. They have no idea we are hunting a phantom vendor. I opened my laptop, linking my encrypted drive to his network. Let us tear his operation apart. For the next 6 hours, we pooled our resources with ruthless efficiency. Alex commanded a vast network of corporate intelligence algorithms running sweeping data pulls that processed millions of transactions in seconds. I provided the logistical framework mapping the exact supply chain of the embezzlement. I showed Alex how Jason was structuring the payouts. He was diverting capital from legitimate research and development budgets, masking the theft as independent contractor fees for the Olympus project. Alex mirrored my screen to the main monitor. He typed a rapid sequence of commands isolating the routing numbers Jason used to transfer the corporate funds to the dummy shell company. Look at this routing sequence, Alex murmured, leaning over my shoulder. His chest brushed lightly against my back, the faint scent of cedar wrapping around me. The proximity was suddenly intensely distracting. He is using a cascading transfer protocol. The money hits the shell company splinters into 4 offshore holding accounts, and then trickles back into a domestic escrow account. It is a classic money laundering technique, but it is executed with the sloppy desperation of an amateur. I focused on the screen, ignoring the sudden acceleration of my pulse. I traced the escrow account details. This is the account he used to purchase the luxury vehicle for Brittany, and look here, I pointed to a recent massive outgoing wire. He just initiated a down payment on a private residential estate in the suburbs. He is liquidating stolen corporate assets to buy a mansion for his mistress, while trying to legally steal my house to cover his remaining tracks. We continued dissecting the financial wreckage deep into the night. The initial parameters of our fake engagement began to blur. This was no longer just a transactional business arrangement. There was a raw, undeniable synergy between us. We anticipated each other's tactical moves, finishing each other's analytical equations without speaking. When I needed a specific tax document, Alex already had it pulled up on the secondary monitor. When he needed a logistical timeline of Jason's project deliverables, I already mapped it on the whiteboard. Around 3 in the morning, the exhaustion finally caught up with my recovering body. I winced, pressing a hand against my bandaged chest as a sharp spasm of pain radiated through my ribs. Alex noticed instantly. He closed his laptop with a sharp click and turned his chair to face me. "You are pushing yourself too hard," he said softly. The predatory edge in his voice replaced by a genuine protective warmth. "The hunt can pause for a few hours. You need to rest." I shook my head stubbornly. "We are too close, Alexander. I want every single transaction verified. I want the entire financial web mapped out before the sun comes up." Alex reached out his warm hand, gently wrapping around my wrist to pull my hand away from the keyboard. His thumb brushed against my pulse point, the physical contact sending a jolt of pure electricity straight to my core. I looked up, my breath catching in my throat. His dark eyes were intense, stripping away the corporate armor we both wore. "Strictly business," I whispered, though my voice lacked any real conviction. Alex smiled, a slow, devastating expression that made my heart race faster than any financial discovery. "I am starting to think," he said quietly, "that strictly business is a highly inefficient way for us to operate right now." I held his steady gaze, the air in the command center suddenly thick. The sterile glow of the high-resolution monitors cast sharp shadows across his face, highlighting the ruthless edge that made Alexander Pierce a legend. Before I could close the gap, the sharp buzzing of my smartphone shattered the quiet intimacy of the room. It was a torrential cascade of alerts vibrating against the mahogany table with angry urgency. The digital strike had shifted to my professional network. I pulled away from Alex, the supply chain director, instantly overriding the vulnerable woman. I picked up the device and unlocked the screen. The notifications were pouring in from my professional networking platform. Jason had launched a coordinated smear campaign. He published a meticulously crafted 1,000-word manifesto designed to go viral. The headline read, "Overcoming Financial Abuse and Toxic Betrayal While Leading Tech Innovation." I read the post aloud, my voice devoid of emotion, treating his lies as raw data. Jason painted himself as the ultimate corporate martyr. He described the agony of managing multi-million-dollar software deployments while returning home to a spouse who systematically drained his assets and weaponized a minor health scare to extort him for lifelong alimony. He claimed I abandoned our marriage to pursue a selfish agenda, leaving him to rebuild his shattered life. He used buzzwords that the corporate world consumed like candy, framing his infidelity and embezzlement as a journey of pure survival. It was a masterpiece of narcissistic projection. Below the main post, Brittany had already initiated the echo chamber. Her comment pinned to the top with hundreds of likes praised his unyielding strength and visionary leadership during such a dark chapter. Other executives, mid-level managers, and industry peers were chiming in with their blind support. They praised his courage for speaking out against toxic spouses. The post was spreading like wildfire through the exact corporate circles where I had spent the last decade building my spotless reputation. Jason was actively attempting to execute the threat Patricia had failed to deliver. He was trying to destroy my livelihood by making me a public corporate liability. Alex stood up, his jaw set in a rigid line as he read the screen over my shoulder. "He is overplaying his hand." Alex stated, his tone dropping to absolute zero. "He is using a professional platform to wage a personal vendetta, assuming you will shrink away in shame. He thinks public humiliation will force you to surrender the real estate assets and quietly disappear. Do you want my legal team to issue an immediate gag order and file a massive defamation lawsuit?" I shook my head, my eyes tracking the engagement metrics on Jason's post. No. Let him talk. Let him build his massive fraudulent platform. A gag order just makes me look defensive. In supply chain logistics, when an adversary exposes their flank to launch an attack, you do not block the strike. You let them overextend, and then you cut their supply line entirely. I am going to let him construct his beautiful glass house, and then we are going to shatter it completely at the merger gala. But right now, I have to contain the immediate fallout at my own headquarters before I lose my operational base. By Monday morning, the digital smear had fully infiltrated my corporate environment. I walked into the executive suite of my retail conglomerate wearing a tailored gray suit, my posture perfectly rigid despite the aching stitches in my chest. I ignored the side glances and hushed whispers from the junior analysts in the break room. My destination was the corner office. I barely had time to set my briefcase on my desk before my executive assistant informed me that the chief executive officer requested my immediate presence. Richard Sterling sat behind his massive glass desk, looking deeply uncomfortable. He had always respected my logistical prowess, but corporate executives are inherently risk-averse creatures. The optics of this situation are highly problematic. Richard began gesturing to a printed copy of Jason's viral post resting on his polished desk. Our brand is built on stability and ethical leadership. Having our director of supply chain publicly accused of financial abuse and extortion by a prominent tech executive creates a severe public relations liability. Board members are expressing serious concerns regarding your integrity. I know your work ethic is flawless, but we cannot afford a messy scandal involving moral turpitude. I did not flinch. I sat perfectly straight, maintaining unbroken eye contact with the man who held my career in his hands. Richard Weiss said, my voice carrying the absolute authority of a woman who managed billion-dollar global shipping routes. "You know I operate strictly on data, not emotion. The individual who authored that post is currently under active investigation for massive corporate embezzlement and federal fraud. He is attempting to preemptively destroy my credibility because I possess the documentation of his crimes. He is bleeding his own company dry to fund a shadow life, and he is using a social media pity party as a smokescreen to distract his investors." Richard stared at me, his risk-averse nature colliding with the sheer confidence of my statement. Are you telling me that post is entirely fabricated to cover up corporate theft? He asked, his voice dropping to a serious, hushed whisper. I am telling you that within exactly 2 weeks, he will be publicly terminated and handed over to federal authorities, I replied smoothly. I am not asking for your blind faith. I am asking for exactly 14 days to clear my name. Do not suspend me. Do not issue a statement. Give me 2 weeks, and I guarantee you the truth will not only exonerate me, but it will completely distance this corporation from a catastrophic federal scandal. If I fail to deliver the absolute destruction of his credibility, by then I will hand you my resignation on the 15th day and just walk away forever. Richard Sterling stared at me for a long moment, the heavy silence stretching across his massive glass desk. Finally, he gave a single rigid nod, granting me the 14 days I demanded. I walked out of the corporate headquarters, with my head held high, my supply chain logic successfully defending my career from a catastrophic social media assault. When I returned to the secure corporate apartment, Alex was already waiting in the makeshift war room. The massive monitors were illuminated with complex financial flowcharts. He had spent the morning deploying his venture capital intelligence network to bypass the final security protocols protecting Jason's employer. I set my briefcase down and joined him at the mahogany table, the lingering sting in my surgical wounds entirely suppressed by the adrenaline of the hunt. We had 2 weeks to secure the explosive payload that would obliterate Jason. We need to crack the Olympus project, I told Alex, pulling up the chair beside him. Jason is arrogant, but he is hiding the bulk of his stolen assets behind a firewall we have not fully breached yet. Alex typed a rapid sequence of commands into his terminal, his dark eyes fixed on the cascading lines of code. He hit the enter key and a highly restricted financial ledger populated the main screen. This is the master ledger for his research and development division. Alex explained, his voice low and dangerous. I had my analysts run a cross-reference against the state business registry for the vendor named Olympus Consulting Solutions. Look at the incorporation date. I leaned forward, analyzing the data points. The limited liability company was incorporated exactly 8 weeks ago, precisely when Jason was promoted to manage the new software integration initiative. The registered agent was a post office box in Delaware, a state notorious for corporate anonymity. I traced the invoice routing numbers displayed on the ledger. Jason was approving massive recurring payouts to Olympus Consulting Solutions for alleged software optimization services. But there were no deliverables attached to these invoices. No software patches, no code reviews, no beta testing reports. It is a ghost ship, I stated, the reality of his crime crystallizing on the monitor. The Olympus project is not a consulting firm. It is a dummy vendor shell company. He is authorizing corporate payments for services that do not exist, approving the invoices himself and funneling the capital directly into an offshore holding account. Alex pulled up the banking destination codes, his jaw clenching. He is bleeding his own employer dry. He has siphoned over $400,000 in the last 2 months alone. But where is the physical capital landing, I asked, needing to connect the stolen funds to his immediate lifestyle. We traced the offshore account routing back to a domestic financial institution. The transaction history was a masterclass in narcissistic consumption. Jason had not just purchased a luxury estate. He was funding an entire shadow life for Brittany using stolen corporate assets. I pointed to a recent wire transfer for $95,000 directed to a high-end European automotive dealership. He bought her a Porsche, I noted coldly. And look at these recurring charges. He is paying for weekly designer shopping sprees, private club memberships, and first-class trips they claimed were corporate travel. Jason was literally draining corporate blood to keep a 26-year-old assistant dripping in luxury items. He had installed her in the marital home I paid for, while quietly shifting stolen corporate wealth to build a financial fortress he thought I could never touch. Why execute this now? I mused aloud, looking at the aggressive acceleration of his theft. The embezzlement is sloppy. If a standard internal auditor reviews this ledger, he will be caught immediately. Alex leaned back in his chair, a dark, predatory realization crossing his face. Because he is not anticipating a standard internal audit, Alex stated smoothly. He is anticipating my venture capital acquisition. I looked at Alex, the tactical pieces finally snapping into perfect alignment. Jason knows that when your firm absorbs his company, the financial architecture will be completely dismantled and restructured. He believes the upcoming acquisition will create enough chaotic accounting turnover to bury his embezzlement forever. He thinks your merger is the ultimate smokescreen. He is literally betting his freedom on your corporate transition. I leaned against the table, absorbing the monumental scale of his arrogance. Jason had constructed a fragile house of cards, assuming the sheer momentum of a multi-billion-dollar acquisition would sweep his fraudulent transactions into the archival abyss. He believed the acquiring entity would be too focused on restructuring executive departments to notice a few $100,000 leaking through an obscure research and development vendor. He thought he was playing the ultimate corporate game, outsmarting both a sick wife and a colossal financial institution simultaneously. Alex reached out and gently closed his laptop screen. The soft click echoed in the quiet apartment. Jason's strategy relies entirely on being invisible to the people at the top. Alex said, his voice a low, lethal hum. He thinks the men running the acquisition are too far removed from the ground-level data to spot a dummy vendor. He never calculated the risk of his discarded wife sitting in a secure room conducting a forensic audit shoulder to shoulder with the man who is buying his entire world. I smiled, the sharp, relentless pain of my surgical incisions fading beneath a wave of pure, tactical euphoria. He wanted a divorce to eliminate a defective liability, I replied, staring at the darkened screen. Instead, he handed me the exact weapon required to orchestrate his absolute ruin. Our timeline was now firmly etched in solid stone. We had exactly 14 days to finalize this dossier before the grand merger gala. Jason and Brittany thought they were completely untouchable, blinded by their own greed and vanity. They were busy measuring drapes, utterly unaware that the ground beneath them was about to detonate. The next 4 days blurred into a marathon of data extraction and strategic planning. We transformed the corporate apartment into a fortified command center, ordering takeout and running entirely on black coffee and sheer adrenaline. The physical pain from my surgery began to subside, replaced by the electric anticipation of an impending victory. I spent hours mapping the exact trajectory of Jason's stolen capital, tracing every fraudulent invoice from the Olympus project straight into the escrow accounts, funding his luxury estate. Alex worked silently beside me, his long fingers flying across his keyboard as he secured the internal server logs needed to prove Jason unilaterally authorized the transfers without board approval. We moved in perfect synchronization. There was no hesitation, no wasted movement. When I needed a specific financial routing code, Alex had it isolated and highlighted before I even asked. When he required a logistical timeline of the software development cycle to prove Jason bypassed standard compliance reviews, I had a comprehensive chart populated on the main monitor. We were a devastatingly effective unit, operating on a wavelength of pure analytical synergy. Late Thursday evening, the steady rhythm of our work shifted. I was deeply engrossed in a complex spreadsheet cross-referencing the delivery dates of Jason's luxury car lease against the corporate payout schedule. The numbers aligned flawlessly, sealing his guilt. I let out a sharp breath of satisfaction and leaned back in my chair. When I turned to share the discovery, I found Alex watching me. He was not looking at the glowing monitors or the damning financial data. His dark, intelligent eyes were fixed entirely on my face. He had discarded his tie hours ago, the top buttons of his crisp white shirt undone. The ambient light from the screens cast striking shadows across his strong jawline. He looked at me with an intensity that stripped away the professional boundaries we had carefully maintained. It was not the calculating assessment of a venture capitalist evaluating an asset. It was something far more profound, something raw and dangerously permanent. "You are magnificent," Claire, Alex said softly. The deep resonance of his voice sent a sudden, unmistakable tremor straight through my chest. I froze, my hand still resting on the mouse. "I'm just running basic forensic logistics, Alexander. Anyone with a supply chain background could identify these discrepancies. No, they could not, he replied slowly, pushing his chair away from the desk. Most people would have shattered under the sheer weight of what you endured this week. A cancer diagnosis, a brutal surgery, a devastating betrayal by a spouse, and a coordinated public smear campaign. You took all of that trauma, compartmentalized it, and weaponized it. You did not just survive the fire, you learned how to control the flames. He stood up and walked around the heavy mahogany table, closing the physical distance between us. My heart hammered against my ribs, the rhythm entirely unrelated to the surgical recovery. Alex stopped right in front of my chair. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and withdrew a small black velvet box. I looked at the box, then up at his face. We agreed on a strategic alliance, I reminded him, my voice barely a whisper. We needed a prop to secure your cover story for the merger gala. Alex gently opened the box. Resting on the dark velvet was a ring. It was not a generic diamond purchased hastily from a high-end jeweler. It was a custom-designed masterpiece. A flawless emerald-cut diamond flanked by two sleek tapered baguettes set in solid platinum. It was elegant, sharp, and brutally beautiful. It looked exactly like me. I had my private jeweler design this 3 days ago. Alex stated, his gaze never leaving mine. I gave him very specific instructions. I told him I needed a ring for a woman who does not break under pressure. A woman who operates with absolute precision and unyielding strength. I stared at the brilliant stone, the breath catching in my throat. Alexander, this is a multi-million-dollar piece of jewelry. As a prop, it is a massive overallocation of resources. Alex knelt down, bringing himself to my eye level. He gently took my left hand in his thumb tracing the faint pulse at my wrist. It is no longer a prop, Claire. I am a man who builds empires based on calculated risks and undeniable value. But looking at you right now, analyzing the sheer brilliance of your mind and the ferocity of your spirit, I realize this is not a risk. It is the absolute certainty of my life. He held the ring up, the facets catching the dim light of the command center. Our conversation in that hospital ward started as a spiteful joke against a weak, pathetic man, Alex said smoothly. But the alliance we built in this room is the most authentic partnership I have ever experienced. I do not want a fake engagement to facilitate a corporate takedown. I want the real thing. I want a genuine promise. Marry me, Claire. Not to make Jason lose his mind, but because we are an unstoppable force together. I looked at the man kneeling before me. He was offering a terrifying, magnificent reality. I did not need to run a cost-benefit analysis. I slipped my left hand forward, maintaining fierce eye contact. Put it on, I said softly. Alex slid the cold platinum band onto my finger. It fit perfectly, anchoring the promise. He stood up, pulling me to my feet, and kissed me. It was not a calculated maneuver. It was a searing, consuming claim that erased every lingering shadow of my failed marriage. When we finally pulled away, the dynamic in the room had fundamentally shifted. We turned back to the glowing monitors. The objective has escalated, Alex stated, his arm resting securely around my waist. This is no longer just a messy divorce. The objective has escalated, Alex stated, his arm resting securely around my waist. This is no longer just a messy divorce. It is a corporate execution, and we are going to deliver the killing blow. By Monday morning, I sat at the mahogany table and opened my laptop to schedule my immediate post-operative oncology screening. I logged right into the healthcare provider portal, expecting to select an appointment slot for the following week. Instead, a glaring red error message populated the screen. Policy inactive. Coverage terminated. I stared at the bold letters, processing the data point with chilling clarity. Jason held the primary insurance policy through his technology firm. Terminating a spouse from a corporate healthcare plan during an active medical crisis without a finalized divorce decree required malicious administrative maneuvering. Jason intentionally contacted his human resources department to aggressively sever my medical lifeline. He knew I needed follow-up scans to confirm the lumpectomy was successful. He weaponized my cellular health to force my financial surrender. He calculated that physical fear would entirely break me. Alex walked into the command center holding 2 cups of black coffee. He took one look at my monitor and froze. His confident posture vanished, replaced by a sudden, terrifying stillness. His dark eyes locked onto the error message, and I watched the billionaire venture capitalist transform into an apex predator calculating a lethal strike. He set the coffee down with a sharp clack. "Did he just cancel your oncology coverage?" Alex asked, his deep voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register that commanded total obedience. I nodded, maintaining my clinical detachment. "He cut the insurance, Alexander. He assumes I am operating on limited cash reserves and cannot afford the out-of-pocket costs for specialized cancer screenings. He wants me terrified of a relapse, hoping pure fear will force me to sign over the huge marital home in exchange for basic medical care." Before Alex could deploy his legal team, the secure intercom buzzed. The concierge announced that a specialized courier was requesting immediate access to deliver priority legal documents requiring my direct signature. Alex authorized the security clearance, his jaw set in a rigid line of barely contained fury. Minutes later, a process server stepped into the penthouse. He handed me a manila envelope, requested my signature on his digital pad, and swiftly departed without speaking a single word. I carried the envelope back to the mahogany table and sliced it open. I slid the thick stack of legal paper onto the smooth wood. It was a formal civil lawsuit filed by Jason's litigation attorney. I scanned the executive summary. Jason was not just suing for a standard divorce settlement. He was filing a tort claim demanding $200,000 in emotional damages. The lawsuit alleged that my financial abuse combined with a deliberately exaggerated medical condition caused him profound psychological distress and severe career anxiety. He claimed my breast cancer diagnosis was a calculated manipulation tactic designed to hinder his professional trajectory. The audacity of his lies was breathtaking. Alex read the document over my shoulder, his hand gripping the back of my chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. "This is not just a frivolous lawsuit, Claire." Alex stated, his tone vibrating with absolute disgust. "This is a targeted harassment campaign. He is trying to drain your remaining liquid capital by forcing you into a prolonged legal defense. I am calling my federal litigation team right now. We are burying him in counter-injunctions before lunch. He will not survive the week." I raised my left hand, the heavy platinum and diamond engagement ring, catching the ambient light from the monitors, and placed it firmly over Alex's hand. "No," I commanded smoothly, my voice devoid of any panic or sorrow. "Do not call your lawyers, Alexander. Let him proceed." Alex looked at me, his intense dark eyes searching my face for any sign of breaking. "Claire, he is actively trying to deny you cancer treatments and bankrupt you. I will not sit here and let a middle management parasite threaten your survival." "He is not threatening my survival," I replied, standing up to face him directly. "He is signing his own death warrant. When a toxic vendor proves they lack fundamental operational ethics, you do not negotiate. You sever them from the network and ensure they never re-enter the market. Jason just proved he has zero humanity left. He is willing to risk my physical life to secure a real estate asset for his mistress. I will not allow him to escape now." I looked down at the absurd lawsuit, feeling an icy calm settle over my nervous system. Any lingering shred of empathy I harbored for the man I spent 7 years carrying to the executive suite vanished. It was replaced by a steel resolve so absolute it felt physical. The audacity of Jason weaponizing my cellular health solidified my complete lack of mercy. He thought he was delivering the final squeeze to break my spirit. Instead, he simply removed the safety protocols from my retaliation. He unleashed a true monster. "We stick to the operational timeline," I told Alex, my voice radiating pure lethal certainty. "The merger gala is exactly 10 days away. He wants to play the victim of a toxic wife. We will give him the exact narrative he wants right up until the moment he steps onto that stage. I am going to draft an email right now. I am going to play the desperate broken woman he expects me to be. I will simply tell him he wins. Alex watched me, the fierce protectiveness in his posture slowly yielding to profound admiration. He recognized the tactical brilliance of the pivot. "You are going to bait the trap." He noted a dangerous smile returning to his face. "I am going to hand-deliver the bait myself. Right now," I confirmed, turning back to my laptop to initiate the final phase of our operation. I sat at the mahogany table, my laptop resting under my fingertips. Alex stood over my shoulder as I opened a blank email draft. The recipient was Jason. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. To catch a narcissist, you must feed their ego, constructing a narrative where their power crushed your spirit. I channeled the weak, thoroughly defeated woman Jason wanted. I began typing. The subject line projected immediate submission. "I surrender. Please stop." I paused before diving into the body of the message. "Jason, you win. Your lawsuit and the medical insurance termination broke me. I am terrified my cancer will return, and I cannot afford a single screening. Your mother also threatened to contact my board of directors to destroy my career. I cannot lose my job, Jason. It is the only thing I have left. The medical expenses are piling up and the stress is destroying me. I am exhausted. I cannot fight your corporate lawyers. I cannot fight your mother. I just want this nightmare to end." I read the paragraph aloud to Alex. He crossed his arms over his chest. "That is a masterpiece of psychological manipulation, Claire. He is going to read that and feel like a god." "That is exactly the point," I replied. "He needs to believe his aggressive tactics yielded a total capitulation. Now I deliver the prize." I continued typing. "You can have the house. You can have everything inside it. I will sign the quitclaim deed releasing my equity in the property. I will sign whatever settlement agreement your lawyer drafts relinquishing any claim to alimony or your retirement accounts. I just need you to drop the frivolous lawsuit for emotional damages and stop your family from targeting my employment. Please, Jason, I am begging you to show me a fraction of mercy so I can just pay for my basic medical survival." I stopped typing and looked at the screen. It was sickening to read. Writing those words was revolting, but the strategic value was undeniable. Jason would be suspicious if I simply mailed the documents. I needed to engineer a scenario forcing a physical exchange at his impending corporate execution. I added the final critical paragraph. "However, given everything that has happened, I do not trust your legal team, and I do not trust the mail system. I am terrified you will take the signed deed and proceed with the lawsuit anyway to bankrupt me. I will only hand over the notarized physical document to you directly, face to face. Your company is hosting the massive merger celebration gala this Saturday at the Grand Hotel. I will bring the signed quitclaim deed. I will wait quietly in the lobby near the coat check. Come down, take the papers, and give me a written guarantee dropping the lawsuit. That is my only condition. Let me walk away with my job and my life." I read the email one last time, verifying the tone perfectly balanced desperation and paranoia. It painted the picture of a shattered woman clinging to her last shred of dignity, terrified of being tricked again. Jason would salivate at the prospect of me standing in the lobby of his most triumphant corporate event, handing over a $1.2 million asset like a defeated peasant offering a tribute to a king. He would view it as the ultimate power trip. I moved the cursor over the send button. I did not hesitate. I clicked it. The email vanished from the screen, rocketing directly to Jason's corporate inbox. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling a long, steady breath. The trap was perfectly set. The bait was in the water. Alex walked around the table and sat in the chair beside me. He poured us both a fresh cup of coffee from the carafe, sliding one toward my hands. He looked at the empty email screen, a fierce, predatory smile lighting up his features. "He will never resist that," Alex stated with absolute certainty. "The optics are too delicious for a man with his psychological profile. He gets to parade proudly around the American corporate elite, knowing his conquered sick ex-wife is waiting by the coat check to surrender her largest financial asset. He will probably bring Brittany to witness the total humiliation." I took a slow sip of black coffee, the bitter taste mirroring the cold satisfaction settling in my chest. He will definitely bring Brittany, I agreed. He needs an audience for his victory. He thinks I am coming to the Grand Hotel to beg. He has absolutely no idea that I am walking into that venue on the arm of the billionaire who just purchased his entire existence. We have exactly 5 days until the gala. Alex said, his tone shifting back to the rapid-fire cadence of a venture capital chief executive officer. My federal litigation team is finalizing the financial dossier on the Olympus project. We have the wire transfers, the dummy invoices, and the offshore routing numbers perfectly documented. David is acting as our external compliance counsel. He is currently drafting the termination papers and coordinating with federal law enforcement to ensure they are on standby at the venue. I looked at the heavy platinum and diamond ring resting on my left hand. It caught the harsh light of the monitors, a brilliant, unyielding symbol of the alliance we had forged in the fires of betrayal. Jason thought he was playing a game of intimidation and attrition. He thought cutting my medical insurance was a genius tactical maneuver that would secure his real estate portfolio. He failed to realize that every aggressive action he took simply provided me with more ammunition to ensure he spent the next decade in a federal penitentiary. I turned back to the glowing spreadsheet containing his stolen assets. Let us finalize the audit, Alexander. We have a corporate execution to attend this weekend, and I want his financial ruin to be absolutely flawless. Jason sat behind the massive desk in his corner office, staring at his computer monitor with a wide, predatory grin. The email from Claire had just hit his inbox, and it was everything he had anticipated. He leaned back in his chair, steepled his fingers, and let out a sharp bark of laughter. He reached for his phone and dialed his assistant. Brittany walked in exactly 3 seconds later, wearing an expensive designer dress paid for by the Olympus project. She closed the oak door and leaned against his desk. "What is so funny?" she asked, a cruel and highly arrogant smirk playing on her glossy lips. Jason confidently turned his glowing monitor so she could see the screen. "Read it," he commanded, his voice dripping with pure arrogance. The defective liability finally broke. Brittany leaned over, her eyes scanning the text. A malicious smile spread across her face as she read Claire's desperate plea for mercy. "She actually wrote that she surrenders." Brittany laughed. "She is terrified. You totally crushed her, Jason. Canceling her health insurance was a genius move. I told you she would panic once paying for her cancer screenings set in." Jason pulled Brittany onto his lap, reveling in the validation. "I knew she lacked the stamina for a real corporate fight. She thinks she is so smart, but she folded the minute I applied real pressure. And look at the conditions she set. She wants to hand over the $1.2 million quitclaim deed at the merger gala. She is going to stand by the coat check and beg me to drop the lawsuit." Brittany wrapped her arms around his neck. "Are we going to let her in?" "Absolutely not," Jason scoffed. "I will walk down to the lobby, take the deed from her shaking hands, and have security escort her off the premises. My mother is going to love this. Patricia has been waiting for this. I am going to text my mother right now and tell her the house is officially ours, free and clear." He picked up his phone, his massive ego completely blinding him. He never questioned why a supply chain expert would suddenly surrender via email. He only saw a mirror reflecting his own perceived brilliance. He typed a triumphant message to Patricia, utterly unaware that he was walking into a federal trap. Across the city, inside the impenetrable security of Alex's corporate apartment, the atmosphere was entirely different. There was no arrogant gloating. There was only the quiet efficiency of a war room finalizing a strike. The mahogany dining table was completely covered in financial printouts, encrypted hard drives, and legal briefs. David walked out of the elevator carrying a thick briefcase. He looked immaculate in a charcoal suit, his eyes focused for battle. He set his briefcase on the table and nodded to Alex, then turned to me. "I have the final compliance documentation," David stated, unlatching his briefcase. As the external compliance counsel representing the acquiring entity, I am legally obligated to report any financial irregularities discovered during the due diligence phase directly to federal authorities. I just need the compiled forensics to attach to my report. I slid a massive binder across the table toward him. It is all there, David. Every single fraudulent transaction. David opened the binder, his sharp legal mind instantly processing the data we had organized. I had mapped out the entire anatomy of the Olympus project. I included the incorporation documents of the dummy vendor, highlighting the Delaware Shell Company. Beside it, Alex had provided the internal server logs from Jason's technology firm. The logs proved Jason used his credentials to bypass accounting approvals, authorizing payouts to Olympus. This is incredibly thorough, Claire David noted, flipping through the bank routing sequences. You tracked the offshore money laundering directly into the domestic escrow accounts. Alex handed David a secondary file. I also pulled the sales records for the Porsche and the suburban estate. The capital inflows for both transactions perfectly match the exact dollar amounts missing from his research and development budget. The paper trail is completely unbroken. David arranged the documents into his legal portfolio, his expression hardening as he reviewed the theft. He stole over $400,000 in less than 2 months. This elevates the crime to massive federal wire fraud and corporate embezzlement. The FBI takes a very aggressive stance on executives bleeding assets during an active merger. Are they ready? I asked, my voice calm and steady. David snapped his briefcase shut, the sound sharp and final in the quiet room. The federal agents are on standby. I submitted a preliminary briefing to the White-Collar Crime Division this morning. They were highly motivated by the evidence we teased. They have agreed to coordinate the arrest at the Grand Hotel during the gala. They want to make a public example of him to deter similar corporate fraud. Alex stood beside me, his presence a solid, immovable anchor. Jason thinks he is walking into a coronation. Alex said, a cold smile touching his lips. He expects to be named a managing partner. He is going to walk onto that stage expecting a promotion, and he is going to walk off in handcuffs. I looked at the finalized dossier resting inside David's briefcase. The logistical operation was perfectly executed. The supply chain of Jason's destruction was fully optimized. There were no weak links, no missing data points, and no room for escape. He weaponized my cancer, destroyed my marriage, and tried to leave me drowning in medical debt. I was not just going to divorce him. I was going to erase his entire existence from the corporate world. The trap is now firmly locked, I stated, meeting the eyes of the two men. We have forged the ultimate weapon to ensure absolute justice. Now we just sit back and patiently wait for him to step up onto that brightly lit stage to accept his ultimate downfall. Saturday evening arrived with the crisp chill of a perfect autumn night in the city. The Grand Hotel ballroom was transformed into a fortress of American corporate wealth. It was a cavernous, opulent space dripping with tiered crystal chandeliers, towering floral centerpieces, and the soft hum of a live string quartet. The room was packed with the city elite venture capitalists, technology executives, and prominent board members, mingling over top-tier champagne and imported caviar. The entire event was designed to project absolute stability and massive financial success ahead of the impending corporate merger. Right in the center of this overwhelming opulence stood Jason. He was completely in his element, parading Brittany around the room like a newly acquired trophy. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo, his chest puffed out with the sheer arrogance of a man who believed he had successfully outsmarted the entire universe. He acted like the absolute king of the world, aggressively shaking hands with senior board members and smoothly networking his way through the dense crowd. He was actively laying the groundwork for his anticipated promotion, telling anyone who would listen that his software division was poised for record-breaking growth under the new venture capital leadership. Brittany clung tightly to his arm, wearing a flashy sequined designer gown that I knew for an absolute fact was purchased using stolen research and development funds. She laughed loudly at corporate jokes she did not understand, sipping premium vodka and basking entirely in her stolen luxury. Near the edge of the VIP section, Patricia and Natalie held court. My former mother-in-law wore a dark velvet evening gown, her neck weighed down by a heavy, ostentatious diamond necklace. She held a flute of champagne, leaning in to whisper viciously to a group of wealthy socialites and country club wives. I could easily imagine the venom she was spilling, painting me as the bitter, financially abusive, discarded wife, while elevating Jason to the status of a corporate saint who survived a toxic marriage. Natalie stood beside her, eagerly nodding along, completely oblivious to the fact that her own husband David was currently coordinating a federal strike team just a few floors above them in a secure hotel suite. Jason kept checking his expensive watch, his eyes darting eagerly toward the grand lobby doors. He was waiting for his ultimate prize. He was waiting for the broken, desperate woman from the email to arrive at the coat check and hand over a $1.2 million real estate asset in a manila envelope. He did not have to wait much longer. Precisely at 8 o'clock, the massive oak doors of the grand ballroom swung open. I did not huddle by the coat check in the lobby. I did not hide in the shadows like a defeated peasant delivering a tribute to a king. I walked straight through the main entrance, stepping directly into the brilliant cascading light of the chandeliers. I was not the frail, exhausted cancer patient they expected. I was a director of supply chain, and I was dressed for a corporate execution. I wore a custom-designed floor-length gown of deep emerald silk. The fabric moved like liquid armor, the sharp, asymmetrical cut highlighting my physical strength rather than hiding my surgical recovery. My hair was styled in a sleek, immaculate sweep, and resting prominently on my left hand was the brilliant multi-million-dollar platinum engagement ring Alexander Pierce had placed there. I looked radiant, powerful, and entirely untouchable. The ripple effect of my entrance was immediate and palpable. Conversations near the doors abruptly stopped, heads turned. The quiet murmur of high society gossip rippled through the dense crowd as prominent industry leaders recognized the woman Jason had just spent the last week publicly crucifying on his viral professional networking post. I did not look at the crowd. I kept my posture perfectly rigid, my eyes scanning the room with the cold, calculated precision of a predator locating its target. It took exactly 4 seconds for Jason to spot me. The smug, triumphant smile on his face instantly vanished, replaced by a momentary flash of absolute paralyzing shock. He blinked, staring at the emerald silk and the undeniable aura of unyielding power radiating from my every step. But his shock was quickly swallowed by his massive, fragile ego. He assumed my striking appearance was a desperate, theatrical attempt to save face in front of my industry peers before I quietly surrendered the deed. Jason whispered something sharply to Brittany, and the two of them broke away from their networking circle to intercept me before I could walk further into the center of the room. Brittany scoffed loudly as they approached, eyeing my designer gown with poorly disguised jealousy. She crossed her arms, trying to project a dominance she simply did not possess. Jason stopped directly in my path, intentionally blocking my progression toward the main stage where the executives were gathered. He looked me up and down, a cruel, mocking sneer twisting his features. "What kind of pathetic stunt is this?" Claire, Jason hissed, keeping his voice low and threatening so the surrounding executives could not hear. "You explicitly said you would be waiting by the coat check. Did you dress up in this ridiculous outfit just to beg me for your job in public? You are embarrassing yourself. Hand over the signed papers right now, and I might tell my mother to call off her friends on your board of directors." I looked at him, my expression completely blank and devoid of any emotion. I did not speak a single word. My absolute silence infuriated him further. He raised his hand, gesturing sharply to 2 broad-shouldered hotel security guards stationed near the ballroom entrance. The guards immediately stepped forward, their eyes fixed firmly on me. "I already told security you were a disgruntled former employee attempting to crash an exclusive corporate event," Jason whispered venomously, leaning in close so I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "You give me that envelope with the signed quitclaim deed right now, or I will have those guards physically drag you out of this hotel by your expensive dress. Everyone in this room already knows you are a toxic liability. Do not make a scene you cannot afford to pay for." Brittany let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Just give him the house, Claire," she taunted. "You lost everything. it is time to go back to your cheap apartment. I looked at Brittany's mocking smile and Jason's outstretched hand demanding an envelope I had no intention of delivering. I did not carry a manila folder containing a quitclaim deed. I carried the absolute certainty of their destruction. Before Jason could snap his fingers to summon the security guards, a sharp, resonant chime echoed through the massive sound system. The towering crystal chandeliers above us dimmed in perfect synchronization, casting the outer edges of the ballroom into deep shadows, while a brilliant white spotlight illuminated the main stage. The ambient chatter of hundreds of corporate elites instantly evaporated, replaced by a hushed, expectant silence. The moment had finally arrived. Jason immediately dropped his threatening posture. He straightened his custom-tailored tuxedo, hastily adjusting his lapels and smoothing his perfectly styled hair. He turned his back to me, his attention entirely hijacked by the brightly lit stage. He wanted to make sure he was standing in the perfect position to applaud his new boss. The chief executive officer of Jason's technology firm stepped up to the acrylic podium, tapping the microphone twice. "Good evening, distinguished guests, colleagues, and partners." The executive began, his voice booming across the silent room. "Tonight we celebrate a monumental milestone. We are officially closing a chapter of incredible growth and opening a new one under the guidance of an absolute titan in the venture capital world. We are honored to be acquired by a firm that recognizes our true potential. Please join me in welcoming the founder, the visionary, and the new owner of our corporate destiny, Alexander Pierce." The ballroom erupted into thunderous applause. Jason clapped louder than anyone else in our immediate vicinity, a wide, sycophantic smile plastered across his face. He leaned down and whispered excitedly to Brittany, telling her to pay close attention to the man who was about to make him a managing partner. Alexander Pierce strode onto the stage with the effortless, lethal grace of an apex predator inspecting his newly acquired territory. He wore a sharp midnight blue tuxedo that fit his broad shoulders flawlessly. He did not wave or smile at the crowd. He simply stepped up to the podium, gripped the edges with his powerful hands, and swept his dark, intelligent eyes across the sea of faces. The applause rapidly faded into a tense, captivated silence. Alex commanded the room without saying a single word. His sheer presence projected absolute authority, dominating the American corporate elite gathered before him. "Thank you, Alex," said his deep, resonant voice rolling over the silent ballroom. "We will discuss the strategic synergy of this acquisition and the restructuring of your executive board shortly. However, before we delve into the financial architecture of our new shared future, I have a much more important introduction to make." Alex paused, his gaze deliberately cutting through the dense crowd until it locked perfectly onto mine. "I have built my entire empire on the principles of calculating risk, identifying undeniable value, and eliminating toxic liabilities." Alex continued, his voice softening slightly, but losing none of its immense power. "But an empire is only as strong as the partnership that leads it. Tonight, I want to publicly introduce the brilliant, unyielding woman who makes my empire complete. Please welcome my fiancée, Claire." On absolute perfect cue, the secondary spotlight mounted on the balcony swung violently across the room, cutting through the darkness to land directly on me. I stood bathed in the blinding white light, the emerald silk of my gown shimmering brilliantly. I raised my left hand, resting it gracefully against my collarbone, allowing the custom platinum and diamond ring to catch the intense glare of the spotlight. The physical collapse of Jason's reality happened in agonizing slow motion. The smug, triumphant smile slid off his face like melting wax. All the blood instantly drained from his cheeks, leaving him a ghastly, sickly shade of gray. His brain completely misfired, unable to process the conflicting data points crashing into his consciousness. The discarded, sick, financially ruined wife he had just threatened to throw out of the hotel was currently illuminated by a spotlight standing as the future wife of the billionaire who held his entire career in the palm of his hand. A sharp, piercing shatter echoed loudly from the VIP section. Patricia had dropped her crystal champagne flute. It smashed against the polished marble floor, sending expensive wine and jagged shards of glass splashing over the hem of her dark velvet gown. Natalie let out a loud, strangled gasp, her hands flying up to cover her mouth as she stared at me in pure, unadulterated terror. Brittany took a frantic step backward, her eyes darting wildly between the towering figure on the stage and my radiant, untouchable posture. She suddenly realized the sequined designer dress she was wearing offered absolutely no protection against the tsunami that was about to hit them. Alex did not let the crowd murmur or react. He leaned closer to the microphone, his voice dropping to a glacial, lethal register that sent a visible shiver through every executive standing in the room. As the new owner of this company, my very first executive action is an immediate internal house cleaning, Alex announced clearly. We have uncovered a massive systemic breach of corporate trust. During our final due diligence sweep, my forensic accounting team uncovered a dummy vendor shell company known as the Olympus Project. A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. Executives began whispering frantically, their heads swiveling to look at their peers. Jason staggered backward, his legs giving out slightly. He bumped hard into a tall cocktail table, his hands shaking violently as the words Olympus Project echoed through the massive speakers. Over the past 2 months, hundreds of thousands of dollars in research and development capital were actively embezzled to fund luxury vehicles and private real estate. Alex stated coldly, his eyes pinning Jason to the floor. My legal counsel has already assembled the digital forensics, the offshore routing numbers, and the undeniable proof of authorization. I am handing the entire audit dossier directly over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Alex raised his hand and pointed directly at Jason, his finger acting as a loaded weapon. Vice President Jason Alex commanded, his voice cracking through the room like a whip. You are officially terminated with absolute cause. Your equity is seized and you are stripped of all corporate access. Security, hold that man for the authorities. The 2 broad-shouldered hotel security guards Jason had tried to weaponize against me just 3 minutes prior immediately stepped forward. They did not grab me. They flanked Jason on both sides, their massive hands clamping down firmly onto his tailored tuxedo shoulders. Jason let out a pathetic, suffocating whimper, his knees buckling entirely under the sheer crushing weight of his public destruction. The crowd parted seamlessly, creating a wide aisle through the center of the ballroom. David stepped forward, his charcoal suit impeccably tailored, his posture projecting the absolute integrity of a seasoned corporate lawyer. He did not look at his mother-in-law or his wife, who were both frozen in horror near the VIP tables. David kept his eyes fixed firmly on Jason. He walked up to the crumbling vice president, opened his leather portfolio, and extracted a thick manila envelope alongside a formal legal document bearing the seal of the federal government. Jason looked up at his brother-in-law, his tear-filled eyes silently begging for some twisted version of family loyalty. David did not offer a shred of sympathy. He held out the papers. As the external compliance counsel for this merger, it is my legal duty to inform you that your employment is terminated immediately, David said, his voice ringing with absolute finality. Furthermore, I am formally serving you with a federal subpoena from the Federal Bureau of Investigation regarding the Olympus Project embezzlement. Consider yourself served, Jason. David dropped the heavy documents directly onto Jason's lap. The sound of the paper hitting the floor seemed to finally snap Brittany out of her stunned paralysis. Her eyes darted wildly from the federal subpoena to the security guards, and finally to the man she thought was her limitless financial ticket. She suddenly realized the luxury sports car, the expensive designer dresses, and the suburban estate were not gifts. They were federal evidence. The reality of becoming an accessory to massive corporate fraud hit her like a freight train. Brittany let out a piercing, hysterical shriek that echoed violently across the crystal chandeliers. "You lied to me," she screamed, her voice cracking with panic. "You told me you were a partner. You are a thief." She did not hesitate to save herself. She hurled her crystal glass of premium vodka directly at Jason's face, the liquid splashing across his terrified features, and turned on her heels. Brittany sprinted toward the grand lobby doors, abandoning the man she had helped destroy my marriage for leaving him sobbing on the marble floor. As security hoisted Jason to his feet to drag him out to the waiting federal agents, A desperate, pathetic wail rose from the crowd. Patricia shoved her way through the circle of executives, her velvet evening gown stained and reeking of spilled champagne. She ignored her son being hauled away and lunged directly toward the stage, her hands grasping desperately at the edge of the acrylic podium. She looked up at me, her face smeared with mascara and contorted in pure agonizing terror. "Claire, please." Patricia begged, her voice a shrill, hysterical sob. "You cannot do this. He is your husband. We are your family. Please just call off the lawyers. I will make him give you the entire house. I will make him pay your medical bills. Have mercy on us, I am begging you." Alex took a protective step forward, ready to signal security to remove her, but I gently placed my hand on his chest. I stepped to the edge of the stage and looked down at the woman who had barged into my apartment just days ago to threaten my career and mock my cancer. I did not feel anger anymore. I only felt the cold, efficient satisfaction of a perfectly executed logistical operation. "You told me Jason deserved a healthy woman who could build a future," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the microphone for the entire American corporate elite to hear. "You told me I was a defective liability because I got sick. But the truth is, Patricia, the only disease in my life was your son, and I just surgically removed him." I looked at her shaking, pathetic form and delivered the final fatal blow to her massive ego. "I am not built for a sick family." I turned my back on her. The security guards hauled Jason out the doors, his wails fading into the lobby. Patricia collapsed onto the floor, weeping openly, as the elite socialites she so desperately wanted to impress looked down at her with absolute disgust. Alex pulled me into his side, took the microphone, and seamlessly redirected the ballroom to celebrate a future free of corporate parasites. 6 months later, the crisp spring breeze blew across the sprawling terrace of Alex's penthouse. I stood near the glass railing holding a cup of green tea, watching the morning sunlight catch the brilliant facets of the platinum engagement ring on my left hand. A lot had changed since that autumn night at the Grand Hotel. Jason's assumption that he could outsmart a venture capital audit cost him everything. He pled guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud and corporate embezzlement to avoid a lengthier trial, and he is currently serving an 8-year sentence in a federal penitentiary. The government seized the Porsche, the suburban estate, and every stolen asset he had funneled to Brittany, leaving her completely broke and under investigation. Patricia and Natalie are drowning in massive legal debt, having mortgaged their own homes to pay for Jason's federal defense attorneys. They lost their country club memberships, their social standing, and their completely unearned sense of superiority. But the most important update did not involve my enemies. It involved my own survival. Just last week, my oncologist sat across from me, reviewed my latest scans, and declared me 100% cancer-free. Alex stepped out onto the terrace, his dark hair catching the wind as he wrapped his arms around me from behind. He pressed a warm kiss to my temple, resting his chin on my shoulder as we looked out over the city skyline we now conquered together. "You are thinking about the supply chain again," Alex murmured playfully, holding me tight. I smiled, leaning back into his solid embrace. "I am thinking about how efficiently we eliminated a toxic disruption," I replied. "Jason texted me 30 minutes before my surgery to break my spirit. He wanted to discard me in my darkest moment. But instead of letting him destroy me, I used his own arrogance to construct a masterpiece of justice. If you are watching this, let my story be your ultimate reminder. When the people who are supposed to protect you decide to betray you, do not beg for their mercy. Audit their weaknesses, optimize your strength, and build a reality where they can never touch you again." Have you ever had to strategically cut a toxic person out of your life to save your own future? Let me know your story in the comments below. Do not forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more stories where absolute karma is served cold. Remember, sometimes a brutal ending is just the necessary foundation for a beautiful, untouchable new beginning. The story of Claire's triumphant retaliation against her ex-husband Jason offers a profound lesson on the true nature of resilience and the power of maintaining emotional composure during a crisis. When faced with the devastating dual blow of a cancer diagnosis and a sudden cruel divorce, the natural human instinct is often to succumb to panic or despair. However, Claire's journey demonstrates that true strength lies in the ability to compartmentalize pain and pivot towards strategic action. Instead of allowing Jason's betrayal to break her spirit, she applied the analytical mindset of her profession to her personal life. She treated her emotional devastation not as a permanent state of defeat, but as a logistical problem that required a calculated solution. This narrative teaches us that our lowest moments do not have to define us. They can serve as the very catalyst for our greatest victories. The people who underestimate us, who attempt to weaponize our vulnerabilities against us, often leave themselves exposed through their own arrogance. By refusing to play the victim, Claire took control of the narrative. She meticulously gathered evidence, formed the right alliances, and allowed her adversaries to construct their own downfall through their greed and overconfidence. It is a powerful reminder that silence and preparation are often far more lethal than a loud, immediate reaction. You do not have to match the chaos of those who hurt you. Instead, you can choose to step back, assess the landscape, and build a fortress they can never penetrate. True justice is rarely handed to us. It is something we must meticulously engineer ourselves. If you are currently facing a situation where someone is trying to diminish your worth, take a deep breath, gather your strength, and start building your own masterpiece of justice today.